The Arizona sun was a hard master that spared no man, nor woman who dared to cross its dominion. It scorched the copper earth until it cracked and bled dust. It silenced the coyotes in the heat of noon, and it turned the very air into a wavering mirage that blurred the line between heaven and hell. Fort Bowie stood against that heat like a white scar upon the land, a bastion of order carved from wilderness, its flag trembling beneath the endless blue. Inside its walls, the world was ruled by rifles, orders, and men who believed they could tame the frontier by sheer will. Among them lived Evelyn Carter, the only daughter of Colonel Benjamin Carter, a man whose heart had long turned to stone under the weight of command. Her mother had died years before, taken by fever in the high plains, and the girl who once chased tumbleweeds across the desert floor had been replaced by a woman taught to sit straight, speak softly, and obey. At 22, Evelyn carried herself with the calm dignity of her father's house, yet beneath that composure flickered a restlessness she couldn't name. The men at the fort called her the Colonel's dove, beautiful, polite, and untouchable. She smiled when spoken to, attended Sunday services, and played the piano in the mess hall when the evenings grew long. But her mind wandered beyond the walls. When she looked out across the desert at dusk, she didn't see emptiness. She saw freedom, wild and infinite, untamed as a running horse. Her father saw something else entirely. To him, the desert was a place of danger, filled with what he called ghost men, the Apache, fierce and unrelenting. They struck like lightning, vanished like smoke, and refused to bow before the soldiers' flags. So when word came that General Nathaniel Briggs, the newly appointed military commander for the territory, was to visit Fort Bowie, the colonel saw an opportunity. Briggs was powerful, influential, and unmarried. An alliance with him would not only secure Evelyn's future, but also strengthen the colonel's standing among his peers. Evelyn met the general on a blistering afternoon in May. He arrived on horseback, flanked by troopers, his presence commanding the courtyard as if he owned the very sun above. His hair had gone silver at the temples, his mustache neatly trimmed, his uniform spotless. He was a man carved from discipline, broad-shouldered and upright, with eyes like cold iron. When he took her hand, his voice was smooth as whiskey. "Miss Carter," he said, bowing slightly, "it's a rare comfort to find such grace in a land as harsh as this." She curtsied, the heat rising in her cheeks. "The desert has its own beauty, sir. It only asks that you see it differently." He smiled faintly as though humoring a child. "Beauty is a luxury out here, my dear. What this land needs is order." From that day, the general began calling often. He spoke of Washington, of campaigns of duty and honor. He brought her gifts, silk gloves from St. Louis, a silver brooch shaped like an eagle. He spoke to her father of marriage in the same tone he used when discussing troop deployment, and the colonel, ever practical, agreed without hesitation. Evelyn was promised to be the general's wife before she had the chance to protest. The wedding was set for autumn, when the heat would ease and the rains might bless the desert with green. Yet Evelyn felt no joy. Each night she sat by her window, the lantern flickering beside her, and listened to the distant drums carried by the wind. "The Apache were restless again," said the soldiers. "A warrior named Taza, the son of the late Chief Cochise, was rallying his people to resist relocation. His name was whispered through the fort with both fear and fascination. Men said he could ride a horse without sound, strike an enemy from 100 paces, and vanish into the rocks before a bullet found him." Evelyn found herself wondering, not about the violence, but about the man behind the legend. What kind of heart fought so fiercely for a land that punished every breath? One night, as the sky flared with the orange hue of a dying sun, Evelyn spoke with her maid Maria, a half-Mexican woman who'd lived long in the borderlands. Maria told her stories in low tones. The Apache were not demons, she said, but people with deep pride and deep sorrow. They fought because they had no choice. "They were born of this earth," Maria whispered. "It speaks to them. That is something no soldier will ever understand." Those words settled in Evelyn's soul like a seed. From that night, she could not look at the mountains without feeling they were watching her back. Weeks later, as preparations for her wedding began, Evelyn rode with a small party to the nearby town of Dos Cabezas. Her father insisted she be escorted by soldiers, but the journey was supposed to be routine. The desert stretched endless before them, dotted with mesquite and scrub, the wind carrying the faint scent of rain. Evelyn wore a wide-brimmed hat and a pale riding dress, her parasol resting across her lap. They were halfway through a dry arroyo when the attack came. A shrill cry split the air, followed by gunfire that echoed off the canyon walls. Horses screamed and reared as dark figures surged from the rocks. Apache riders, swift as ghosts, their faces painted in red and black. The escort fired wildly, but the ambush was too sudden, too perfect. In the chaos, Evelyn's horse bolted. She clung to the reins, heart pounding, the world spinning in dust and thunder. Then, through the haze, she saw him, a tall man astride a black horse, hair flowing in the wind, bow drawn and eyes burning with focus. He rode straight toward her, fearless and silent. One of the soldiers raised his rifle to shoot, but before he could pull the trigger, the Apache loosed an arrow that struck him clean through the chest. Evelyn gasped. The next instant, the warrior was upon her, seizing her reins. His voice was deep, calm, commanding. "Hold still," he said in rough English. Before she could speak, he lifted her from the saddle as though she weighed nothing and swung her before him. The desert spun, a blur of gold and crimson, until the fort and the soldiers were nothing but echoes in the wind. They rode hard through the canyons, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. When they finally stopped, night had fallen and the stars burned white over the desert sky. Evelyn's hands trembled as he untied her wrists. She looked up at him, the man called Taza, and felt the ground tilt beneath her. He was not what she expected. His face was hard, yes, but not cruel. His eyes, dark as obsidian, held something she'd never seen in the general's or any soldier's gaze, a quiet strength born of sorrow and pride. He said only one thing before turning away. "You are safe here. Do not try to run." Evelyn sat in the sand, her heart pounding, torn between fear and a strange, unspoken pull toward the man who had taken her from everything she knew. And somewhere beyond the hills, Fort Bowie's lanterns burned through the night, searching, waiting, unaware that the woman promised to a general had just crossed the threshold into a world that would change her forever. The desert night was sharp and cold, a cruel contrast to the burning heat of day. The stars hung low like icy lanterns over the dark ridges, and the silence between them was so deep that Evelyn Carter could hear her own heartbeat. She sat near the edge of a small fire, her wrists no longer bound but her soul trembling in a cage of confusion. Around her, the Apache camp stirred with quiet life. Warriors murmured in their native tongue, shadows moved among the flickering light, and children peered curiously from behind their mothers' skirts. The people she had been taught to fear, savages, her father had called them, were simply men and women, tired, proud, and alive in ways she could not yet understand. Her captor, the man they called Taza, sat apart from the others, silent as a stone carved by the desert wind. The firelight caught the edges of his face, strong jaw, a long scar across his cheek, eyes that reflected not anger but endurance. His presence seemed to command the air around him. No one questioned him. No one spoke above him. When he did glance her way, Evelyn felt something in his gaze that was not cruelty but rather judgment, as if he were measuring what kind of woman fate had placed in his path. The first night passed without words. She was given a blanket of tanned hide and a bowl of stew that smelled of corn and wild herbs. Hunger won over pride, and she ate in silence, trying not to meet the eyes that studied her. When morning came, the world changed again. The desert glowed pink and gold, the mountains rising like the bones of an ancient god. Evelyn woke to the sound of horses and laughter, the kind that comes not from joy but from survival. She watched the Apache move through their morning like a dance, women grinding maize, men tending to the horses, children carrying water from a nearby stream. Every movement was purpose, every gesture discipline. Taza approached her after sunrise. He carried a canteen of water and a small bundle of food. "You will stay with us," he said in halting English. "You are safe if you respect our ways." "Safe?" Evelyn echoed bitterly. "I've been taken against my will." He met her anger without flinching. "So have my people," he replied, his voice low and calm. "Taken from the earth that is ours. You are not the only captive here." Those words struck her harder than any threat could. He turned away and left her to think on them. Days passed, each one slowly unraveling the truth she'd been taught. She saw the Apache not as faceless enemies, but as families, Mothers cradling infants, elders telling stories by the fire, warriors returning from hunts with laughter in their throats. She learned that their ways were steeped in respect, for the land, for the dead, for the spirit of every living thing. Taza rarely spoke, but when he did, his words held weight. Evelyn noticed how the others listened to him with quiet reverence. He was not their chief, but he was clearly a leader of spirit and deed. His authority came not from title, but from sacrifice. One evening, after a long silence between them, Evelyn dared to ask, "Why did you spare me?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because death does not heal anything," he said. "You are not my enemy, though you wear their clothes." She looked down at her torn riding dress, dust-stained and frayed. "And what am I, then?" "A guest," he said simply. "Until you understand." Understand what, she did not know. But each day, something inside her began to shift. She helped a woman named Suni, who taught her to weave baskets and prepare cornmeal. When Evelyn laughed one morning at her own clumsy attempts, the children laughed too, and Suni smiled, saying softly, "You have heart, white woman." That night, as the fire crackled under the canopy of stars, Taza joined her. He told her of the land, how every stone and river carried memory, how the mountains were alive with the spirits of their ancestors. He spoke of the treaties broken by soldiers, of villages burned in the name of civilization. His voice carried no hatred, only sorrow. "My father Cochise fought for peace," he said, "but the white generals do not understand peace. They only understand walls." Evelyn listened, her chest tightening. "Not all of us are like that," she whispered. Taza looked at her with quiet curiosity. "Then why do you live behind their walls?" She had no answer. That night, as the camp drifted into sleep, Evelyn lay awake beneath the stars. For the first time, she saw the desert not as a wasteland, but as something alive, breathing, eternal. The scent of sage filled the air, the sound of horses rustling nearby. It was a strange comfort she could not explain, but danger brewed beyond the firelight. Far away at Fort Bowie, General Briggs sat in his tent, fury boiling in his chest. He had sworn to recover Evelyn, though his motives were far from noble. To him she was property, a promise made, a symbol of order. That an Apache warrior had taken her was a humiliation he would not endure. His search parties swept through the mountains, burning camps, taking prisoners, demanding answers. "Bring her back," he ordered, "or I'll salt the earth until they choke on the dust." Unaware of this wrath closing in, Evelyn found herself caught between two worlds. Each day she spent among the Apache deepened the fracture within her. When she looked at Taza, she saw a man who lived with purpose, who carried his pain like armor and his honor like fire. When she thought of the general, she saw only iron discipline and a future of cold obedience. The turning point came one afternoon when a small boy, Suni's son, fell from a horse and broke his leg. The camp was in turmoil. The child screamed in agony. Evelyn, who had grown up around army surgeons, rushed to help. She fashioned a splint from branches and cloth, binding the leg carefully while murmuring calm words. When it was done, the boy quieted, clutching her hand. Taza watched from the shadows, saying nothing. But that night, when he approached her by the stream, his expression had changed. "You have courage," he said. "I only did what anyone would," she replied. "No," he said firmly, "not anyone." Their eyes met in the twilight, his dark and steady, hers bright and questioning. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. She turned away first, her heart pounding like hoofbeats. As summer deepened, the soldiers drew nearer. Scouts brought word of camps burned, of war on the wind. The Apache began to move deeper into the mountains, carrying their supplies and their wounded. Evelyn helped pack what she could, but she saw the fear in their eyes, the knowledge that this peace, fragile as morning mist, would soon shatter. Taza stood at the edge of camp, staring toward the horizon. When she approached him, he said quietly, "Your people will come for you. They always do." "And what will they do to you?" she asked. He didn't answer. But the look in his eyes told her enough. That night, as the wind swept cold across the desert, Evelyn realized that whatever fate awaited her, she no longer belonged to the world she'd left behind. Something within her had already crossed the line that divided them, a line drawn by men who believed they could own land, hearts or destiny. She sat beneath the stars, her thoughts heavy, her chest aching with an emotion she dared not name. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried out, its lonely voice echoing through the canyon, and in that sound, Evelyn heard her own heart answer. The monsoon rains came late that summer, spilling from the clouds like the heavens themselves had split open. The canyons ran with red water, the air heavy with thunder and the scent of wet dust. It was during those weeks, when the Apache camp sought shelter among the high rocks, that Evelyn Carter realized she had crossed an invisible line from which there was no return. She was no longer the colonel's daughter, no longer a prize to be delivered to a man in uniform. She had become something else entirely, something wilder, freer, and more dangerous. The days passed in quiet rhythm. She helped the women grind corn, mend hides, and care for the children. Her hands, once soft from years of gentility, had grown rough and strong. She wore a simple dress of deerskin now, her golden hair tied back in a braid. The people no longer looked at her with suspicion. Some even smiled when she passed, and Taza, he watched her. He did not linger near her often, but when he did, his presence filled the air like thunder before the rain. He spoke to her sometimes in the evenings when the campfires burned low and the stars shimmered like shards of glass. He told her of the old ways, of how his father had tried to make peace with the white generals, and how that peace had been betrayed. There was a time, Taza said one night, his voice low, when we believed we could live beside you. My father met with your leaders. He offered his hand, but every treaty was a lie written on the wind. Evelyn looked at him, the firelight flickering in her eyes. And now you hate us for it? I do not hate, he said. Hate is a fire that burns the man who carries it. But I remember. That is enough. She wanted to tell him she understood, but how could she? Her life had been built upon the walls that crushed his. Yet when he spoke, she felt something stir deep within her, a sense of guilt and awe and longing all tangled together. Days later, as the rains broke and the sun returned, the tribe began to move eastward through the mountain passes. The journey was hard, through narrow ridges where the rocks crumbled beneath their horses' hooves and valleys where the soldiers might strike without warning. Evelyn rode with them, her face burned brown by the sun, her spirit hardened by the wind. It was there, amid that wilderness, that her bond with Taza deepened. One afternoon, while crossing a high canyon, a sudden storm rolled in. The sky turned black as ink and lightning ripped across the ridges. A flash struck a ledge above them, sending boulders tumbling down. Horses screamed, people scattered. Evelyn's mount reared and threw her into the dust. She tried to rise, but a wall of rain and debris blinded her. Through the chaos, a voice cut through the roar, deep, fierce, familiar. Evelyn. Taza appeared through the storm like a phantom, leaping from his horse. He pulled her up, his arm firm around her waist. Together they fought their way through the torrent, leading the frightened animals to a narrow cave in the rock. Inside, dripping and breathless, they waited for the storm to pass. The sound of rain pounding against the stone filled the small space. Evelyn shivered, her hair plastered to her face. Taza knelt to start a fire with what dry wood he had. His hands moved with quiet skill, his body glowing bronze in the dim light. When the fire caught, she whispered, "You could have been killed." He looked up at her. "So could you." The words hung between them, thick with meaning. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "Why do you care what happens to me?" Taza stared into the fire, his voice quiet but steady. "Because I see you, Evelyn Carter. Not the daughter of a colonel, not the promise of a general. I see the woman who listens to the wind and does not turn away." Her heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to speak, but her voice failed her. He moved closer, his eyes dark as the storm outside. "You do not belong to them," he said softly, "and you know it." The rain softened to a whisper and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn felt the pull of him, his strength, his quiet dignity, the raw life in him that defied everything she'd ever known. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. The touch was gentle, reverent, yet charged with something fierce and unstoppable. When he kissed her, it was as if the storm broke all over again, wild and consuming, full of thunder and light. The fire crackled beside them, the cave glowing with its warmth. Outside, the storm faded into silence, leaving only the steady rhythm of the rain. In that stillness, Evelyn knew that something sacred had been broken, and something even more sacred had been born. When dawn came, they rode back to the camp without speaking. The world looked different now. every color sharper, every sound deeper. But guilt weighed on her heart. She thought of her father, of the promise she'd made, or rather that had been made for her. She thought of General Briggs and the world that awaited her should she ever return. That world seemed a prison now. Still, word came that morning that the U.S. Army had been seen nearby. Scouts reported a small company moving through the valley, General Briggs himself among them. They were hunting, searching for the Apache stronghold. Fear rippled through the camp. The elders called a council, and Evelyn stood at the edge listening. Some argued to fight, others to flee. Taza remained silent until all others had spoken. Then he said, "We move at dawn. The soldiers bring death, but we will not meet it on our knees." Evelyn caught him afterward. "You can't fight them, Taza, there are too many." His eyes met hers, calm as always. "You think I am afraid of death?" "I think you're too proud to run," she shot back, tears in her eyes. He said nothing. But in his silence, she understood that he would rather die free than live caged. That night, unable to bear it, Evelyn went to him again. The camp was quiet, the moon high. He was tending to his horse, his back turned. "If you stay, they'll kill you," she said. He didn't turn. "If I run, I stop being who I am." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Then let me go to them. I can tell them you're gone, lead them away." At that he turned, his face shadowed with pain. "They will not listen to a woman who has lived among us. To them you are already lost." His words broke her heart more deeply than any cruelty could have. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. "Then what will become of us?" she whispered. He covered her hand with his own. "What must?" They stood that way for a long time, the wind curling around them like a promise and a curse. When she looked into his eyes, she saw not a warrior or an enemy, but the man who had shown her what freedom meant. And she knew, with the certainty of the desert sun, that she loved him. But love, in the frontier, was never enough to stop the guns. The dawn broke crimson over the mountains, the kind of red that spoke of blood before the first shot was ever fired. The desert was still, too still, and Evelyn Carter felt it in her bones, that unnatural hush before violence. The Apache camp was already in motion, men readying their horses, women packing what they could carry. The smell of smoke from distant fires drifted on the morning wind. The soldiers were coming. From the ridge above, Taza stood tall and silent, scanning the horizon. His face was carved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with purpose. Evelyn climbed the rocky slope to stand beside him, her skirt catching on the jagged stone. "They're near," he said, not looking at her. "Before the sun reaches the peak, they will be here." She saw it then, the faint glint of sunlight off bayonets far across the plain. General Briggs had found them at last. "Taza, you can still escape through the pass," she said quickly. "Take your people north. I'll go to them. I'll draw them away." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "No. If I run now, I teach my people to run forever." "Then you'll die," she whispered. His hand brushed hers, gentle yet steady. "If I die standing, I die a man. My father would have wanted that." Evelyn's throat ached. She wanted to scream, to beg, to tear down the world that forced such choices. But before she could speak, a cry went up from the camp below. The soldiers had been spotted crossing the valley. Dust rose like smoke behind them, and the glint of rifles flashed like lightning in the sun. The Apache moved quickly, their defense swift and disciplined. Warriors took positions along the ridges. Women and children gathered deep within the canyon where the walls offered shelter. Evelyn refused to hide. She stayed beside Taza as he prepared for battle, tying a strip of red cloth around his arm. "I should never have brought you into this," he said. "You didn't," she replied. "I walked here myself." He gave her a long look, the kind a man gives when he's memorizing a face for the last time. "Then may the spirits walk with you." The first gunshot cracked across the desert. Then came another and another, until the air itself trembled under the roar. The soldiers advanced in tight formation, their boots kicking up dust, their rifles blazing. Bullets whined off the rocks, horses screamed, and the echoes rolled like thunder through the canyon. Evelyn crouched behind a boulder, hands over her ears, heart hammering. She saw Taza ride forward, fearless, his hair streaming behind him as he led a charge along the ridge. The Apache fired from above, arrows and rifles striking the line of blue coats with deadly precision. The soldiers faltered, regrouped, pressed forward again. Among them she saw him, General Nathaniel Briggs, his gray mustache bristling, his sword raised high. His voice carried through the smoke. "Advance! Take no prisoners! The woman is ours!" Her stomach turned. She had been reduced to a possession again, a thing to reclaim. Rage flooded her veins, burning away fear. A shell struck the ridge near her, spraying rock fragments. Evelyn grabbed the rifle of a fallen soldier, one of Briggs's scouts, and fired wildly toward the line below. The recoil nearly threw her backward, but she steadied herself and fired again. Through the smoke, Taza saw her. His eyes flashed with shock, then pride. He signaled for her to stay low, but she ignored him, reloading with trembling hands. The battle raged for hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky to a merciless blaze. Bodies lay scattered among the rocks, Apache and soldier alike. The cries of the wounded filled the air. Then through the haze, Evelyn saw Briggs. He rode forward alone, his uniform torn, his face red with fury. He spotted her instantly. "Evelyn!" he bellowed. "By God, what have you done? You belong to me." His words cut through the chaos like a blade. He spurred his horse toward her, drawing his pistol. Evelyn froze, unable to move. But before Briggs could reach her, a dark blur shot between them. Taza, charging full speed. The two men collided with the force of thunder. Briggs's pistol went off, the shot echoing across the canyon. Taza fell from his horse, rolling through the dust, but rose to his feet, knife in hand. Briggs dismounted, sword flashing. "Savage!" the general roared, slashing downward. Taza parried, the steel ringing against his blade. The two circled each other, one trained by war, the other forged by survival. Evelyn could do nothing but watch, her heart trapped between hope and horror. The fight was brutal, primal. Briggs struck with precision, Taza with instinct. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. Blood streaked Taza's arm, but his movements never faltered. With a swift twist, he disarmed the general, sending the sword spinning into the dust. Briggs lunged bare-handed, grappling with him, but Taza drove his fist into the man's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The general coughed, clutching at the dust, reaching for a fallen pistol. But before he could fire, Taza stepped forward, the tip of his knife pressed to the man's throat. "Kill me then," Briggs spat. "That's what your kind does." Taza's voice was calm, quiet. "No, that's what your kind taught." He pulled back, letting the knife fall to the ground. "Go back to your fort, General. This land is not yours to claim." He turned away, bleeding but unbroken. Evelyn ran to him, tears streaking through the dust on her face. She pressed her hands against his wound. "You're hurt." "It is nothing," he said, though his breath came heavy. "We must move. The soldiers will come again," but Briggs was not finished. He rose to his knees, the pistol still in his grasp, his face twisted with hate. "She was mine," he roared, raising the gun. Evelyn saw it first. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of Taza. The gun fired. The bullet tore through the air and struck the rock beside them, ricocheting off harmlessly as Taza's warriors came charging from the ridge. They surrounded Briggs, weapons drawn. The general froze, realizing his fate. Taza stepped forward, his voice steady. "Go," he said again. "Leave this place. Tell your men the Apache are not beast. Tell them we only fight when hunted." Briggs stumbled back, defeated, his pride bleeding more than his wounds. The surviving soldiers retreated across the plain, their banners drooping, their trumpets silent. When the last echo of gunfire faded, Evelyn fell to her knees, shaking. The battlefield was a graveyard of dust and silence. The sky had turned pale gold, the sun descending behind the blood-red hills. Taza knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair from her face. "You should have stayed hidden," he said softly. "And let you die?" She whispered. "Never." He smiled faintly, though pain shadowed his eyes. Around them, the surviving Apache gathered their wounded, their faces grim. They had won, but victory had the bitter taste of ashes. As night fell, they buried their dead in the red earth. Evelyn helped where she could, her dress soaked with sweat and tears. When the last mound was covered, Taza stood over it, silent, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "This land remembers," he said. "It always does." Evelyn leaned against him, her heart heavy. The world she once knew, the fort, her father, her promised life, was gone forever. In its place stood something raw and true, born in fire and blood. And as the stars rose over the canyon, Evelyn Carter understood that she had not just chosen love. She had chosen a side. The war between the soldiers and the Apache did not end that summer, nor that autumn, nor the year after. The desert kept its scars, The burned wagons, the bones buried shallow under red sand, the ghosts that walked the canyon trails at dusk. Yet among the ruins of that endless struggle, a legend began to take root. The soldiers called her the deserter's bride. The settlers whispered her name around campfires like a curse and a prayer. To the Apache, she was known by another name, Whitebird, the woman who walked between two worlds. Evelyn Carter had disappeared from Fort Bowie the day General Briggs retreated into silence and shame. No one saw her again within the walls of any fort, nor in any town built by white men. The army searched for her for months, offering reward posters that flapped uselessly in the desert wind. But the land kept its secrets, and so did the Apache. She lived with Taza high in the Sierra Madre Mountains, where the pines whispered and the streams cut silver through the stone. The world there was quieter, untouched by soldiers or politics, ruled only by the turning of seasons and the will of the earth. Their home was a small dwelling of timber and clay, built into the side of a canyon overlooking a wide valley of wildflowers and sage. At dawn they would watch the sun spill over the ridges, painting the world in gold. At night they would listen to the coyotes sing to the moon, their hands intertwined beneath a blanket of stars. Life was not easy, but it was theirs. Evelyn learned to ride without saddle, to hunt rabbits with a bow, to grind maize and weave blankets with the women of the band that had survived the soldiers' wrath. Her English softened, her skin darkened from the sun, and the stiffness that once marked her vanished entirely. She belonged nowhere but with him, and somehow that had become enough. Yet the world beyond their mountain refuge did not forget. Rumors reached them. Rumors of new soldiers arriving from the east, of forts expanding, of Apache resistance being driven farther south. General Briggs had been reassigned, his reputation tarnished, but his hatred still burned. He wanted to erase the humiliation of that battle, and of the woman who had chosen a so-called savage over him. One winter evening, as snow began to dust the pines, Taza returned from hunting with a grim look on his face. Evelyn met him at the doorway, a basket of wood in her arms. "What is it?" she asked. He laid down his bow, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Riders, white men." 2 days away, her heart skipped. "Soldiers?" "Scouts," he said. "They carry rifles and wear the army's coats. They hunt for something or someone." Evelyn felt a chill deeper than the winter wind. "They'll find us." Taza shook his head. "Not if the mountains keep their word." He looked at her then, his gaze steady and warm despite the cold. "Do you regret it?" She blinked. "What?" "Leaving them, the fort. The life you had." Evelyn stepped closer, her hand brushing his chest. "That wasn't life. It was a cage painted gold. I chose you, Taza, and I would again even if it meant dying here." He smiled faintly, that rare, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "Then the spirits have blessed me." For several days they kept watch. The scouts passed through the valley below but never reached the canyon. The mountains, as Taza said, had kept their word. Spring followed winter and life returned to the land. Wildflowers carpeted the hills and the rivers swelled with melting snow. Evelyn spent her days gathering herbs, teaching Apache children the few things she remembered from her old world. How to read letters, how to count the stars by patterns instead of names. At night, she wrote in a small leather journal she had carried from Fort Bowie, the only relic of her past life. Her entries became the story of two worlds colliding, of love surviving in a place where it was never meant to exist. "The desert does not forgive," she wrote once, "but it remembers. And sometimes remembering is its way of showing mercy. But peace in the frontier was never meant to last forever." That summer, scouts returned again, this time in greater number. The Apache could not remain hidden much longer. Whispers of relocation spread through the camp, talk of moving south into Mexico, beyond the army's reach. Evelyn feared it would mean losing the only home she had ever chosen. One night, as the moon rose full and pale, she and Taza sat at the edge of the canyon where the wind whistled through the stone. The world below shimmered silver, vast and unbroken. He said quietly, "There will come a time when I cannot keep you safe here." She turned to him, her hair loose in the wind. "I don't need safety. I need you." He shook his head slowly. "When the soldiers come again, they will bring fire. They will not stop until there is nothing left." Evelyn's hand found his. "Then let them come. We will meet them together. He looked at her then, really looked as though seeing her for the first time all over again. "You were born of their world," he said. "Yet you speak as one of mine," she smiled faintly. "Maybe I was never truly theirs." They kissed beneath the wide and indifferent sky, the stars turning slowly above like ancient witnesses. Days later, as if in answer to his words, the riders came, no longer scouts but soldiers armed and grim. Smoke rose once more on the horizon. The Apache band began to break camp, scattering into the high country. Evelyn packed what she could, blankets, herbs, the journal. Taza led her toward the northern pass, the same path they had taken years ago when he'd first carried her from captivity. Now they rode side by side, equals, partners forged in love and war. Behind them, the valley burned. At the crest of the ridge, they stopped to look back one last time. The sky glowed red, but the mountains stood eternal, unbent. Evelyn took Taza's hand. "Do you think they'll ever stop?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "One day, perhaps. When there is no one left to fight but the wind." They rode on until the firelight disappeared behind them. Years later, travelers passing through the southern ranges told stories of a small homestead deep in the Sierra, of a white woman who spoke fluent Apache, and of the tall warrior who lived beside her. Some said they'd seen her riding across the plains at dawn, her hair loose, her laughter echoing off the stone. Others swore she'd died long ago, buried beside her husband beneath the same tree where they'd first shared a kiss. No one knew which was true. The desert does not give up its secrets easily, but those who rode near the canyon at dusk said that if you listened close, when the wind rushed through the rocks, you could hear a woman's voice whispering through the sagebrush, soft and sure, carried on the breath of the land itself. I was promised to a general, but my heart was conquered by a warrior, and the desert, timeless and vast, answered her with silence, its greatest kind of respect, for it understood what few men ever could, that freedom, once chosen, can never be taken back.